comes to narrative features, everything now, cinema is on a decline, and everything goes to TV, goes to streaming. That's what's on the horizon for filmmakers. I wonder, from what you feel, how does it work for documentary filmmakers?
Okay, we have our. I guess, is it on? I think it's funny that you're saying. I mean, first of all, I guess I was responding to which is easier, because everyone in this room who raised their hand, which I think is everyone, is nothing is easy. There's not an easy part about this. It's often, it's like a calling, and you have to really love doing it. And if you're very, very specific about your work and the craft and the art of filmmaking, it's longer. And it's a series, and it has different elements which we can talk about, but they're equally hard. And having a story that is defined by a feature, I also don't think that in many ways, certainly in series work and also in features, there's always been the landing spot of television. So this is actually not new territory for documentaries. And also, the fact that films are, theatrically released and gaining huge audiences, depending on the film, has actually been a real rise and wave of nonfiction actually having numerous places to land. And then it was public television, then it was cable television, and now we're reaching all the other platforms. So there's more and more places to be seen, and also places without any time limitations or bandwidth limitations as to how many things can Netflix do. A lot. So they're not counting the clock of a day. So there's actually a lot of opportunities to keep doing the kind of work that us in the nonfiction world are so committed to. I feel like we're continually having more opportunities, but with more opportunities comes more competition and more of everything that's good and everything that's not so good. So,
any other views, or what's your experience from the outburst now of other?
Well, I guess for us, Maro and I have been doing this for a long time, since the early '90s, and back then it was like kind of down to like PBS or HBO, and that was it. And you wanted to go to Sundance to launch the film, and then you wanted to be on one of those two outlets. And so now it's just a wonderful thing that there's so many other platforms. It doesn't feel any less difficult or competitive, but it's sort of blown up in a great way, and I think the audience is really there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't add much to that. I think, your guys' perspective from significantly more years of experience is probably more illuminating in that respect. But I do think that there is a lot of opportunity right now, and yet it does not make it easy. I mean, it's never easy, like we were saying. But I think there is every opportunity out there for all of us to make the stories and the films and the series that we are hoping and trying to make. And there are a lot of outlets and growing number who want them. So that, at least, even if it's just as difficult for a lot of different reasons, and from my perspective, that didn't used to be the case.
There used to be the gestation period for a series, and series were almost always at PBS, and I got my start working for Ken Burns on The West, which was like a 12-hour series. But back in the day, it was like, okay, we're going to take a year and a half to write an NEH proposal, and we're going to have like 20 consultants who are weighing in on the proposal like 4 times before it's finished, and we're going to describe why the series is going to mean kind of all things to all people. And it was an incredibly sort of erudite and very sort of careful way to approach a subject, and it took forever, and it took a lot of money, and there was actually funding back then available. Not just from the NEH, but from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting and from corporate sponsors. And that doesn't exist as much anymore. And when you do a series, it's kind of like a shotgun wedding, and you've got to like figure it out a lot quicker and get it to the market a lot quicker because usually there's like 4 other filmmakers who want to make the same film that you're trying to make. So anyway.
Okay, I think that since you talk about some of your work, so maybe we should see some of your work. Can we show Soundbreaking, the trailer?
That's a scary series to show anybody in this room because we cleared some 500 plus legacy tracks. The cost of that is very high. Very, very high. And, we spent years making this series and sort of the deep, deep dive into music that then, we did another 8-hour series on music, sort of launched us to have that as a sort of piece of our pie at Show of Force. But it was an incredibly fat subject matter, the history of recorded music.
Yeah, you don't want to do that in 90 minutes.
And it was actually the sort of the spiritual love child of Sir George Martin, who was just an amazing individual who actually passed away about 2 weeks after seeing the whole series come to life, which took, from the very first days that he talked about wanting to do it, about 10 years. So it was really a long road, of one of the greatest producers who really felt that the art of recording and the real art of being a music producer had not been investigated in a really interesting way because people just wanted to see, single portraiture of artists and that's still true today. I mean, it's a lot easier to go in and do a series about one artist than it is to have, a mass and very large number. So
it's easier for a network to market a music film about Lady Gaga because the person goes to Netflix and they're like, Lady Gaga, that's what I want to watch. But when it's like, it's about recording, they're like, oh, it's just harder for them to like latch on to what it is.
But it was a real labor of love. I mean, and the series is something that we're, very proud of because it was really hard, but it's just a roller coaster ride of fun to watch.
And it's definitely the case where the subject calls for a series treatment and not a 90-minute film because basically we were tasked with looking at the entire history of recording, which is an insanely huge subject to try to cover. And the anxiety for me at the beginning was that you, the audience, everyone has a different taste in music and they want to see the music they love. And so I was like, oh my God, we're gonna like not include like Led Zeppelin and they're gonna come after us like a mob, like how could you? So so we were very conscious about framing the series as stories from the cutting edge of recorded music and not like, this is the story of recording, and Ken Burns, who I'm the biggest fan of, his approach is usually like, this is jazz, or this is baseball. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. I don't want to do that. The subject, it's impossible to do that. So what we tried to do was really tell the Beatles story well, because there's in many ways they're at the center of the story because all the things they did with technology reverberated throughout the whole history of recorded music. And that's what we tried to tell. And we also wanted to be very leveling so that all the artists and producers were in a way sitting at a big table kind of talking to one another. Because it wasn't a ranking about who was the most important. It was just like, look at all these cool innovations and how it transformed the sound of music.
So there are a lot of celebrities here. Behind the scenes,
like 120, 56.
Well, it could be a pain in the ass, like to deal with so many talents with older.
That was the
demands
other
and
giant source of
timetable.
anxiety because even when you have the producer of the Beatles like sending notes to people, these people are busy, and it's like you try to get Roger Waters for an interview, and it's like, well, he's on his yacht for the next 6 months, and you just don't know if they're going to come. So you're trying to plot out what stories you want to tell, not knowing if the artist that is central to telling that story is actually going to say yes to an interview, and so that was like this musical chairs game from hell. That was just, like Annie Lennox, who was such a linchpin in 2 episodes, said, I can do the interview next June. And she showed up next June, but like we were waiting, like, oh my God, if she drops out, we have to replace it with something. So we had to like have replacement stories. You know, we had to have like sort of 3 tiers, like an A, B, and C story for each section of each episode. So that was just nerve-wracking. And we didn't have that much time to make the film in terms of the edit.
I mean, solidly, that project took us about 2.5 years in terms of like straight out, you know, staff of people working in the office every day. It was a long process. But that is, you know, that's also part of, you know, the series commitment is understanding the differences. And, you know, if you guys have questions that will come down the line about that, you know, the difference between creating a series and creating a single story. But the bottom line is it's still about story. You have to find stories all the time that are going to be indicative of a larger idea and a bigger idea and an idea that anybody in the audience is going to bring home into their own head and heart. And you have to find that in every single second of every story that you do. And then, you know, hope that you are really, really finding a truly authentic way to create a through line and to tie those pieces together with a larger idea. Because there's two different, and I'm sure a lot of you are watching series now because there's been a huge resurgence, not resurgence, but maybe a huge, you know, revolution of how series are being, you know, accepted and watched. And there's a lot of things that you have to think about in relation to a series. You know, are your episodes, you know, sort of thematically tied together, but also, you know, very standalone thematically, which is what Soundraking is, or are they, you know, an episodic unfolding nonfiction drama where you're hanging along a single story that is that's unfolding over a course of hours, and you have to sort of cliffhang? Or are people going to watch it Sunday night at 9 for 10 weeks running, or are they going to binge it on Netflix and watch the whole thing, you know, in 2 days? So you have to. So all of those things, you know, come into play now when you really think about whether or not your series is unfolding or whether your series is episodic, which is, you know, or anthology driven in a way. So it's, you know, they're very different and they take a different mindset to think about.
Okay, let's see what Nick has to offer us and talk about his experience, which is a bit different, I think. But let's see conflict. I have to say I was surprised that with these kind of topics you can actually make a shorter version, like a short episodic series. And I know you were contemplating part of the development, and also after that, like, you know, when you were with discussion with broadcasters. So yeah, share the experience with us.
Sure, yeah. And I realize that's a lot to see first thing in the morning. So yeah, my experience with this was, I think actually in retrospect, pretty typical of, I mean, it's a crazy, wild, long story that I'll summarize quickly, but I think that's sort of the point, is that now, many years later, more experience, more relationships with networks, knowing more people who have made all kinds of other series and films, it almost always seems to be that way. You know, there is this long, drawn-out development period. There's a lot of effort involved in getting there. It almost doesn't matter how famous you are. We tend to think, oh, if we have, you know, a hugely established professional track record, or we have celebrities attached to a project, or whatever, it's just going to happen. It's easy, and it almost is never that way. And this was that way also, and there were no celebrities, and I was not and am not a celebrity, and so basically what happened was, without going into the motivation, which I can speak to later if you guys want, of where this series came from, I made the first episode on spec, as often is what we sort of need to do. We need to make a trailer, we need to make something. And I did that with Pete Muller, who's the subject of the first episode, and he's been a good friend and collaborator of mine for a long time. He's now become a National Geographic photographer. And we even shot his interview on the stage in Grosvenor Auditorium at National Geographic headquarters, and they just offered that space. But all of it was very low budget. There was no budget. So, it was shot on a DSLR, with minimal lighting. Everything was very basic. But the story that we were telling and that he was telling was something I felt, and all of us involved felt, was extremely important, visceral, and in the case of his episode, sort of framing for the entire series, which is why it made sense for him to be the kind of pitch reel, and also be the first episode of the series. So we made that, and we loved that, and it took a while to sort of figure out the edit, because in that sense we were also figuring out the show. And then I spent 2.5 years pitching that around, before finally, after about 2 years, getting National Geographic on board. But it took about 6 months to sort of figure things out with them, until there was money to start making the show. And that was amazing. It was a dream come true, to just have full creative control, have the budget that we needed, nothing exorbitant, but for what we had planned, it was completely sufficient, and just put it all up on the screen, put everything into that, and ended up making something that we were very, very proud of, and won some awards and spot by Netflix, and has sort of paved the way for the rest of my career. Not that I'm some hotshot now, but that because we were so driven to do everything we possibly could to make this thing great and to honor the stories that were themselves so important already. It was really a very, I think, transformative experience for everybody involved, including the subjects. So yeah.
I'm really interested in, like, for all of you, like, when you look at a story and you know that you're not gonna make a feature out of it, you're gonna make a series, and then how do you decide how to distribute, like, the episodes? How much time every like, how long will every episode will run? I know that you were really drawn to the shorter version, and I guess you guys, we talked about it before, how you kind of enjoy the fact that now you have, like, you have the possibility of longer episodes. So how do you, from your vision, the way that you look at your project, how do you cut the episodes? How do you construct it?
I just wanted to ask one question, because I just was wondering how many episodes and what are the general running times of the episodes?
This is a mini series, and sort of speaking to Amir's question as well. Each episode is about 7 minutes, and there are six of them. So on Netflix, it exists as a single viewable. They're all put together. That's the way they wanted to do it. Although at first they thought about releasing them individually, and if they had done that, it would have been very cool, because it would have been the first short form series they had ever released, but they weren't quite there yet. There is actually now also a 52-minute version, which was later commissioned by Ovation and is now being distributed internationally by TVF, which is basically the same episodes, the same content, but we got to dive back in and lengthen those stories, which was great. And I think, as proud as I am of the miniseries on Netflix, I think the best version of this project is the 52-minute version now. But in terms of your question too, Amir, I had envisioned this and created this as a short-form episodic series. And at the same time, I had also envisioned a longer format. I sort of saw this as a first step, as something that would be great and stand on its own, but that people would see and serve kind of as a trailer for their individual stories and for the concept in general. And I felt that people would watch this and have a strong appetite for more. So I thought that was the right way to go. And that's the only reason, in my view. I thought there was a very strong case to be made for a longer story, which would be envisioned differently, and there was a very strong case to be made for these shorter episodes, which could get a lot of attention and be viewable online and things like that. And we talked about that with National Geographic and went back and forth a little bit, thinking first that we were going to start with 30-minute episodes and do something else and then do this. And in the end, we went this direction first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we've also done a lot of series work on, very tough subjects in other languages, shot internationally. We did Half the Sky, A Path Appears, then another series called Humanity on the Move. We're now in the midst of another project with Nicholas Kristof looking at, sort of who's falling through the cracks of America. It's a whole series of projects with the writer, the op-ed columnist Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times, some based on his previous work, but also just constant unfolding stories. And when content and storytelling are really difficult, and you make them very long, it's very it's hard for audiences, and you have to think a lot about how they're going to take the impact of these very, very hard stories. So I've sort of been in that territory, and one of the things that we've really done at Show of Force is we've had they've really been multi-platform transmedia projects. So if you think about, if any of you have seen Half the Sky, it exists as a 4-hour series. And, there are multiple stories within those hours, but they're sort of tracking. And these are all stories in and around women and girls in the developing world and, enormous challenges that women and girls were facing, which was the subject of Nick and Cheryl Woodun's best-selling book of that same name, Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide. So we really had to sort of look at how to tell those stories, and what we ended up doing is sort of really looking at sort of an entire array of how a multi-platform project could exist. So we also had 20 or 30 pieces that were anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes in length, and you actually watch those on other platforms. Some of them were extensions of stories we had. Some of them were some stories that don't, that didn't, I won't say make it into, but didn't connect directly to being in the feature, in the sort of feature films, the series episodes. And then we also created, Facebook games and mobile games with very short form content. And short form content gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And anybody in the room with kids knows that there isn't anyone, under the age of 15 who's ever even watched television. They're consuming all of their stories in a different way, and many of them in short form. I mean, there's so many places now you could go and you could talk about 7 minutes, and they would be like, 7 minutes.
But I think that's brilliant. I think the idea of doing these much shorter episodes in series is a great idea. And I do think that sometimes when the subjects are so incredibly difficult, at the end of the day, whether you're watching a 10-minute piece or a 90-minute piece, you're walking away with a deeper understanding of the issue or the problem, and you're having this kind of searing memory of this character who you've met, who you're never going to forget. And I think you can accomplish that in a short piece as effectively as a longer piece. That's just my opinion, but I think it's wonderful that there's all these different new ways to tell storytelling at different lengths, and I think you can tell a super powerful story in a short amount of time, which I can see you've done here.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just say also I should back up and just say one thing, which is that when we began to make these episodes and make the series, the plan at that point was to produce 3 to 5 minute episodes. And the reason for that was that we were embracing that form. We were embracing the distribution platform, which was to be the internet. And we felt, for the reasons that we're all familiar with, that people really wouldn't watch these episodes if they were much longer. And then when we really got into it, we realized that as much as we love and embrace short form as an art form, and I really, as much as I like long form as well, I think I just love short form. I think there's so much that you can communicate in such a small period of time without doing the story disservice. I mean, it's very hard, but if you can do that, I think you can do anything. I don't think you can go the other way. Or at least it's much harder if you're somebody who's only made features to then say, oh, I know how to make a 3-minute film. But you can go the other way because you're really, you've trained yourself to be very, very cognizant of how you're using every single second. But in any case, we started with 3 to 5 minutes as our kind of, self-imposed mandate, and then we realized that these stories had to be longer, even with the same budget that we had. So we just committed to that, and we felt that the way that we were approaching the edit and the way that the stories were coming to life on the screen, that they would sort of speak for themselves, that people would watch them anyway, and they did.
Okay. I want to take you back to the basic.
The question we didn't answer.
There's so many good stories around and interesting and unique stories that you encounter. And I know that, I'm coming from the journalism world, and so many of my friends say, oh, that's a great story. I'm going to make a movie out of it, even though they never had even like a TV piece or something like that. They never had it. But how do you identify a story that is not only good, but that you can actually envision it as a film, as something that will be visual and artistic? How do you pick your stories out of all this potential storytelling out there?
To me, it's just like how it makes me feel to read about the story or to encounter it. I just like have to listen to my own inner voice and keep following it. And because that's what we do as filmmakers. We have an experience, and then we do everything we can to capture that experience and share it with an audience so that they are having the same feeling that we're having.
I think I have like a slightly maybe educationally minded view. I'm chairman of the MFA program in social documentary at SVA, which is, in this neighborhood. And, I have about, anywhere from 18 to 22 MFA graduate candidates in social documentary, every year coming from all around the world. And I would say they spend a good part of 2 years of the program, and certainly in depth in the first year, working with some of the best documentary filmmakers in the world who are on our faculty, talking about what is a good story. How do I find that story? Then if I find that story, how do I access that story? My mom once said to me, because she was a bit of a verbal whip. She was like, not every thought you ever had is an idea. And when I was little, I was like, okay, so let the games begin with my mother. But another film in and of itself. She was an incredibly great, an incredibly smart person. But it's actually a good thing to think about, because not every single thing that's a great story that you read in the paper or you find or someone tells you about is actually a film. There are a lot of places, there are a lot of mediums to land in. Something's a great story, something's a great, fictionalized version that you're responding to, and some things are really served, best served as documentaries. And they're very hard. And now, if you just like open up the paper, like we have a metro project, and we look at, we literally look at what's going on in New York. The city, it's like Dragnet. It's like there's 1,000 stories in the town tonight. There are, but they're very hard. It's very hard to find one that's actually going to deliver, because it's all about story, then it's all about character. Who's actually going to be the storyteller of this film? Who are they engaging? Are they charismatic? Are they too charismatic? Are they chewing up the scenery? Which Jeff and I have made. Jeff made a really great feature doc. Marina Abramovich, The Artist is Present. I mean, this is a woman who, really liked having a film made about her. And afterwards, Jeff was like, I'm never making another movie with someone who doesn't want to be in a movie. This was so fun. And so,
because we had just finished a movie about the circus, where we lived with the circus for a year, and we're just like, the clown does not want to be in the movie. We're like knocking on the trailer door, hello, and he's like, get out of here, and I was just like, enough, like.
but I think finding a story, knowing that story is viable, and then in the world that we're all in today, going and getting that story where literally the corner deli guy will make it complicated for you to get an access to film in his I mean, it didn't used to be that way, but now there's the competition of other filmmakers. I mean, if you see a great story in the New York Times, you can bet 15 people have called by 8 o'clock in the morning, and then it becomes like, a sort of a competitive conversation. The story has to lead, and you have to really look at it, and you have to be truthful, because some things are worth letting go of. They're not going to work. They're not going to deliver on all the levels that you have to talk about. And then when you talk about, jumping into a series, like a huge unfolding story, you really have to be thoughtful of, is this big enough, important enough? Is it relevant enough? Is it gonna ride the wave of what we're talking about, like socially, politically, culturally now? Is it gonna be, and you have to sort of have your own boxes that you're checking in your mind about, is this a story that really desperately needs to be told at this time in this way? And it's definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah, I agree. I would just add that I also think it depends a little bit on where you're at in your career as a filmmaker, because if you haven't really made anything or a lot yet, which is completely fine, and the case for a lot of people, then I think the most important thing that you can do is just find a way of making whatever it is that you're trying to make. But at the same time, while at the same time, I should say, being very critical about what that idea is. I mean, just because you're passionate about it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good series or a good film. But I do think that because it is so difficult to make any of these things happen, if you don't have that passion and belief in yourself and in your film, your story, then it will never happen anyway. Or if it does happen, it won't be good. So you really have to believe that it's. People ask me the same question, like, how do you know, that you have an idea, a story worth making? And for me, the way I generally answer that, although it's definitely become more complicated and nuanced as I get older, the main answer still is that I can't not do it. It's an idea that has occurred to me, and that doesn't mean immediately I'm like, okay, yes, I'm doing it. We're filming tomorrow. I sort of let it gestate, and it sticks around, and it just keeps on coming back, and I keep thinking about it, and there's more angles and more connections, and it's more and more relevant and more important, and eventually I just think, well, this has to be made. And maybe it will be very difficult, and I don't know where the financing is coming from, or maybe it's very clear because there's access already to somebody who has a lot of cachet, who we can then sell and help make this thing happen. But whatever the case is, if you don't have that yourself, it's never going to happen.
You have to vanquish your own ambivalence.
Yeah.
We're gonna
just
open
the way
it.
life is.
We're gonna open it up for questions for you guys soon. Like, I just wanna. And there's we have the microphone here. So if you just wanna
Or project.
get your. No, you need to go there and get your place in line. So, but not all of you. But I have one last question for me, and it's like, maybe it's the harder question. When do you start a project, you work in it, you're very passionate about it. When do you feel that it doesn't go anywhere and you just need to let it go and stop?
Just listening, I was thinking, in the past year, we've probably developed like 12 or 14 series ideas that went nowhere. And they checked so many boxes, and we got pitch meetings, and we went out, and and many of them were just like, this is a great idea, I want to see this. And it was just like boom, boom, boom. And so after a while, you have to have this sense of detachment from it, because it can kind of really undermine you when you have series, the idea after idea that kind of fizzles. and sometimes just for, they should have been made or whatever, but it happens, and that's the hardest part. You just have to keep going.
Series are also very costly, and they're large conversations with broadcasters and funders over long periods of time, for the most part, because they are big commitments for them. And you're having conversations with people, and when you greenlight something that is going to take up many hours and millions of dollars, it's a really big conversation.
And for us, we have a production company, we have a small staff, we have an office, but if we're not doing series, we would go bankrupt really quickly. Like if we were just doing features and shorts, it would be like kind of like a very cool hobby and not something that we could actually live off doing. So series in that regard are really important to us.
Yeah, and that's the nuance. That this is the question that over the past handful of years, I've developed a lot of additional perspective around, because I have a production company too. It's not as large, but I have the same concerns. And if I'm not bringing money in the door somehow, then I can't continue. And so there's a commercial aspect to this too, especially with series, because as we're all saying, they are so costly. It's almost impossible to just go do it anyway. Whereas with the feature or the short, you can, it's still hard to do that, but you can figure out a way. I mean, the 3 major projects I've made, arguably they're all different, but I just found a way of making them, and they got out there and they got bought, and I think a lot of that had to do with just me being very dogged about making them happen. However, I also have a handful of series that were developed over the past 2 years that have gone nowhere. There are some others that I've developed that are still sort of in play and might go somewhere. And I want them all to happen. I think they all should happen. I'm passionate about all of them. But I don't have the power to make all of them happen. I don't even have the power to make one of them happen without somebody else coming on board, a network or a major financier.
And things go around too. Like, you'll put them aside for a while and you'll focus on something that, that's caught someone's immediate attention, and then it can circle back, or, politically you're in a different time, and, things are more relevant in the world at one point than another point, and then something sort of comes back, and you can resurface and end up working on something that you maybe put aside for a while. But I think it's also another part of this question is not putting aside because someone won't pay for it, but putting it aside because you realize it's actually not good enough. And that's, I think, where you really have to, you really have to dig in. You have to go and you have to, you really have to do the legwork. And, there's cost to you, there's cost to, in time, there's literal costs where you have to dig into some stories and know, and sort of, it's a gut feeling, but this isn't going to be good enough. And you have to let it go. Like, not every film is actually worth making. There's some big issues, and it's hard because once you dig far enough in, and we've been talking about that in relation to a recent project where we're just like, because it's so much time and it's so much commitment that you don't actually want to go after the wrong thing, because it still has to be something that's like passionate, that's changing your life, and then it's going to play in an audience in a dark room, and you're not going to be there. It's not a TED Talk. So they have to the film itself has to then have a relationship to the audience. So you really have to, sort of dig in and be honest about whether or not this is a viable story.
Okay. We have a long line there, so let's start.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you have some assumptions for this question. First assumption, you have character, you have story, you have a star, you have all the footage, you have archival stuff. You have something that you can create in whatever format you want, all the raw materials there. So which do you do? Do you do a feature-length documentary, or do you do a series? And if so, what's the format for series? Are they 23 minutes? Are they 45? Are they 8 episodes? Are they 10 episodes? How do you make that determination?
Well, for the format, it depends on which network is willing to do the project.
So they order it from you in a certain way? They tell you what
Yes,
it's going to be?
they will say this is what we want. And, we pitched a project to Apple, and they're like, we're actually wanting, it was a series that was hour-long episodes. They're like, we're interested in doing like 20-minute episodes. And we were like, oh, okay. And we like totally rejiggered the entire idea, which I was like, I'll do 20-minute episodes. I'll stand on my head. I'll do anything, But so, I mean, that's the second part of your question. And then the feature versus series, I just, we would need to know more about what the story is, because if it's about an individual person on their own trajectory that has all kinds of turnabouts and something that might be better for a feature. But if you're looking at a big subject from a number of different angles, like recorded music or looking at historical events through music, that is more befitting a series. But like OJ Made in America, that was just a magnificent example of like looking at a story you thought you knew and putting it in a new context that kind of transformed what the meaning of the story. And it was multiple episodes, and it kept sort of like coming in from different angles. So it just depends. We would have to know more about the specifics of your.
But also there's like big conversations, and OJ Made in America was a driver of some deeper conversations about, is that a single film that got broken into parts, and the story was told in parts, but it's actually one film. It's not necessarily a series. And that became a large conversation because, the film, was an Oscar winner, which is a feature slot, but it's also the Emmy winner. You're also watching it theatrically for 9 hours. I don't know if any of you did that. Or you were watching it episodically, with over an extended period of time, or you binge watched it. So it's like, oh, okay, so it's actually all of the above. So, but I think in terms of like you as a filmmaker sitting and looking at what you have, you really do have to, the material has to speak to you. And some part of that is experience, and part of that is your gut instinct. Everybody was once a first-time filmmaker. You have to have that gut of knowing, is this a big enough story to unfold over a series?
So you would choose it if it's a big enough material. You're saying the series it's better than doing a documentary if all things are equal.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. And also when you're young, and you're a first-time filmmaker, I think we've talked about this quite a bit. The ultimate path sometimes to be able to get more, or to change how you're working, is to have a successful feature doc. That can be an absolute turning point for many, many filmmakers, and many of the people that you think of out in the world now who are doing series are people Alex Gibney, or people who started with very heartfelt, politically driven single stories that were feature docs. So,
Okay, next one.
Hi, my name's Peter Crosby. This is from well, it's for everyone. That hard, objective, outside point of view to kill your darlings. Where do you find that? By submitting to festivals?
With each other.
Never getting in? Or?
Yeah.
She kills my darlings, I kill hers. So.
Yeah, but I mean, it's such an important, right before you've made anything finished, before you've had a feature and cut it down or whatever, how do you find that objective third party or team?
Well, I actually, as many filmmakers that I've worked and known for many years, I started as an editor. And that's about killing your darlings every single time you make a cut. It's not. You have to be. Walter Murch wrote a really good book about editing, and he said, all you're doing is saying no all day in your own mind. No, 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 no. Yes, no, no. Yes, 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 no. It's an all day thing. And part of it is feeling it, and part of it is like rhythm and tone, and you have to, but so you sort of take those same choices, like where you're going to make choices, and you're making them in your own life. I mean, you've gotten, you're still here with us asking the questions. So you just have to keep asking the questions, and sometimes you're just asking them to yourself, and you have to be honest with yourself. It's like when you're young, and it's like, is that guy like blowing me off, or did his like mother really get into a car accident, and that's why he didn't show up? It's like, you have to. It's like a sense of honesty where you're like constantly looking at a reality, because there is the Rashomon world that we live in, where there's a lot of different ways to look at the same thing. But you have to be harsh on yourself, and you have to find a way to have your own standard of what is excellence in your mind, and and make a choice.
So
we have like not a lot of time, so maybe next.
So just the follow-up is.
Yeah, but we have two more people standing behind you.
I'm happy to chat with you. I'm happy to chat with you outside and describe to you how deeply vicious
Thanks.
I am.
It's my own mind versus someone else's.
Yeah. Well.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the short format. What about when you want to do character-driven, like when we do a lot for features following people over years? I don't really see that in series, and I wonder, have you seen that happening in a short format series? Is that even possible, or is that something we can do in a short format?
Sorry, just to clarify, following one or more subjects over many years, but telling that story in a short format?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I basically think you can do anything, but it does depend, like we were saying before, on the story, on a lot of different factors. I mean, I think there are a growing number of short form series that are character driven. You generally don't find them pursuing the same character or set of characters over a long period of time and a number of episodes. It's more, one episode per character, Humans of New York, or, something of that ilk. But, all these rules are sort of meant to be broken. I mean, take like High Maintenance, for instance. I mean, those episodes sometimes are quite short. Some of them are longer. It doesn't really matter. The stories are great. They're following the same characters. It's scripted, of course, but you could have the same thing in the unscripted world. You could. I think that's one of the really beautiful things that we sort of hinted at, touched on a little bit, and was brought up earlier. But with these new platforms, with Netflix, with Amazon, with Hulu, with HBO, mostly you find it in either HBO or Netflix now, or Vimeo, but just that there doesn't need to be a standard length for an episode. It's really more important in the series world, for creators anyway, what is best for the story? What is the best length? So I don't know your story or the example, but that's, I guess, the way I'd answer it.
And you also have to be really truthful about when things are too long, because things are too long, and you fall in love with your own stuff, and you'll usually find that when you force yourself to be a bit tighter and a bit more focused, it usually gets better.
Yeah, sometimes we'll work on like a trailer for weeks to go pitch a network or whatever, and we'll fly out to LA and we'll sit in the room and we know it's really good, and we play it for the executive, and we're sitting there and we're just like, ugh. It's like a minute too long, 2 minutes too long, and you can feel it in the room. So try to have that screening before you go to the pitch.
Okay, next one.
Yeah, I was just curious what your thoughts are if you think YouTube is a viable option to release a series.
You mean the YouTube Red, the new thing?
No, like traditional free YouTube.
It's just who's gonna see it? What's your plan to get eyeballs?
I mean,
that's the.
Yeah.
I don't even understand that world very well, but.
I mean, I can say that it happens. I mean, there are YouTube creators, of course, that sort of launch themselves that way, and just, I didn't get into all the intricacies of how conflict got out there in the end. It was funded by Nat Geo, but then it ended up being given back to me, even though they loved it, because of a joint venture with Fox. It's a complicated but interesting story. And they introduced me to Netflix, but Netflix didn't immediately buy it. And so it just kind of, this process continued, and we had these beautiful, amazing episodes that I wanted to get out there. And in the end, we actually decided to release them all on Vimeo for free. And 2 of them were, well, actually all of it was basically staff picked, got a lot of play. The Atlantic wanted to show them. We did a deal with the Atlantic put them out there. Then the conversation with Netflix sort of heated up, and they were like, this is great, we'll buy it. What else do you have? We'll buy that too, and so that all started because the episodes were getting out there. I think it really speaks to, you should have a plan. Getting eyeballs on things is 100% necessary, but what is the worst possible thing is having something that is just sitting on your desktop, and you're the only one who sees it.
Okay, I think we can squeeze one more, so let's.
Okay, and one thing I was just going to say about YouTube, and this partially is because I'm trying to sort of pass on to the next generation of filmmakers. And also, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that's very crappy. It's shot poorly. Sometimes it'll break through anyway because you were the person standing there in the moment, the viral moments that we all know that can exist. But you also really can find that you can really benefit from shooting things well, and so you have to sort of cull on YouTube a lot, I find, and that some of it it's either going to make you laugh or it's like videos about cats. That's what really actually gets all the big numbers. So you have to be careful because it's a very big ocean there. So you have to sort of really also make that determination that something that you've made that's a really great quality can have a really great life there. But you have to decide, is that a priority to you?
Okay,
That something's really well done.
And there's lots of outlets now, like Slate or Vox or all these places that are dying to have
Good
content that's great video content, and they may not be able to pay you much of anything at all, but it is one way to get your project out there.
Okay, last quick one.
Sorry, this is just a quick question for Maro. I'm just wondering what your criteria are in terms of story and narrative for whether or not something is worth greenlighting or not.
I really think it's about, for me, I'm really strongly about the character, the subjects. Are the subjects really compelling? Like, I'm really going to be able to stick with them, and they are going to be able to, either, not just on their own too, like really looking at the interaction between subjects and stories. Is something really happening? Is there something that we're going to be able to drive here that has a beginning and a middle and some kind of an end? Because ends can be questionable. Things don't always, tie up in a bow. But I really kind of look at, is this a story? And also, I also look, is this a story that's been told? So if it has been told, and most stories have, has it been told in a way that makes it, am I going to be able to tell this in a way that's very unique and that's going to resonate with people from all different walks of life? Like, are you going to find yourself in that story somehow? So I think subject and story are pretty key for me.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it now. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
all your
everyone.
insights.
Don't give up, is all.